Shabbat Shalom, everyone. This is the 18th of the 7th month on the calendar found in the Dead Sea Scrolls as we reckon it. And we are gathered together. It's also the 2nd of October on the Gregorian calendar for those that are paying attention to that. And we are fellowshipping together and sharing the recognitions of Clement currently, which is a great resource. I highly recommend it to everyone. And we are currently on book 1, chapter 20, where Clement has now... Sorry about that. My dog sparked. Anyways, Clement was first introduced to Kepha, and then they found that he's going to be having discussions with Simon the magician, or Simon Ha-Mag as he's called here, and that is now being postponed. So it's a providential event for him, as we'll just read shortly, and he gets to get personally instructed by Kepha, which is a great part of this book. So without further ado, this is chapter 20 of book 1, called Postponement of the Discussion with Simon Ha-Mag, or Simon the Magician. It says, early next morning, Zakkai came in to us, and after salutation, said to Kepha, Shimon puts off the discussion till the 11th Yom of the present month, which is 7 Yamim hence, for he says that then he will have more leisure for the contest. But to me it seems that his putting off is also advantageous to us, so that more may come together, who may be either hearers or judges of our disputation. However, if it seem proper to you, let us occupy the interval in discussing among ourselves the things which we suppose may come into the controversy, so that each of us, knowing what things are to be proposed and what answers are to be given, may consider with himself if they are all right, or if an adversary will be able to find anything to object, or to be spoken of us, or to set aside the things that we bring against him. But if the things that are to be spoken by us are manifestly impregnable on every side, we will have confidence in entering upon the examination. And indeed, this is my opinion, that first of all, it ought to be inquired what is the origin of all things, or what is the immediate thing that may be called the cause of all things that are. So just for clarification, Zakkai is now giving his examples on what he thinks should be discussed in the meetings with the disputations, so that people can be brought point by point to acknowledge the truth. This is a key theme throughout the writings here. They start at the beginning of a thing, not in the middle, and they clearly explain through each part until it's easily comprehended, and then men can make reasonable decisions. And that's how the truth is supposed to work with reason and go hand in hand. But he says, it ought to be inquired what is the origin of all things, or what is the immediate thing that may be called the cause of all things that are. Then, with respect to all things that exist, whether they have been made and by whom, through whom and for whom, whether they have received their substance from one or from two or from many, and whether they have been taken and fashioned from none previously subsisting, or from some then, whether there is any virtue in the highest things or in the lower, whether there is anything that is better than all, or anything that is inferior to all, whether there are any motions or none, whether those things that are seen were always and will be always, whether they have come into existence without a creator, and will pass away without a destroyer. If I say the discussion begins with these things, I think that the things that will be inquired into, being discussed with diligent examination, will be easily ascertained. And when these are ascertained, the knowledge of those that follow will be easily found. I have stated my opinion. Be pleased to intimate or hint what you think of the matter. To this Kepha answered, tell Shimon in the meantime to do as he pleases, and to rest assured that Yahuwah granting, he will always find us ready. And that reminds me of what we have in Yaakov's letter, where he says, and you say you're going to go to this city and do this and that and whatever, when you should say, Yahuwah willing, these things will be so. And we should always defer to his greater judgment. And as he wills, let it be on this earth. Continuing here, it says, then Zakkai went out to intimate or hint to Shimon what he had been told. But Kepha, looking at us and perceiving that I was saddened by the putting off of the contest, said, he who believes that the world is administrated by the providence of Yahuwah El Shaddai ought not, O Clement, my friend, to take it amiss in whatever way particular things are done, being assured that the righteousness of Yahuwah guides to a favorable and fitting issue, even those things that seem superfluous or contrary in any business, and especially towards those who worship him more intimately. And therefore, he who is assured of these things, as I have said, if anything occur contrary to his expectation, he knows how to drive away grief from his mind. On that account, holding it unquestionable in his better judgment, that by the government of the good Yahuwah or Tob Yahuwah, even what seems contrary may be turned to Tob or Tobim. And this is something that's key. If you have the expectation, no matter what the situation is, that he has your best interests at heart, and you believe that, that's what will happen to you. Because he said, as you believe, let it be done to you. And if you take what he said, you know that he has you in the palm of his hand, and he's all powerful. There's nothing that can happen without his will. And if we truly believe what he said, then we know his will is for our benefit, our great benefit all the time. All right, so O Clement, continuing, even now, let not this delay of the magician Shimon sadden you, for I believe that it has been done by the providence of Yahuwah for your advantage, that I may be able in this interval of 7 yamim, or days, to expound to you the method of our belief without any distraction, and the order continuously, according to the tradition of the true foreteller, who alone knows time past as it was, the present as it is, and the future as it will be. Such things were indeed plainly spoken by him, but are not plainly written. They're written in parables, just the way he speaks, but his taught ones are given the truth because they go to him for instruction and further light. This is the pattern we see them walk out in the flesh, and it's exactly what we have to do with his word in the same capacity. But you see, it's the true foreteller, Yahushua Mashiach, our Messiah, as they call him, the one sent from the Father. He's the one that knows the past as it was, the present as it is, and the future as it will be. Meaning that what we experience right now, you can't truly comprehend unless you know the truth that's in his word. And there's a whole bunch of people being deluded and deceived about things that are as we speak, so we know that's true. This is so much so that when they are read, They cannot be comprehended without an expounder, on account of the sin that has grown up with men, as I said before. Therefore, I will explain all things to you, that in those things that are written, you may clearly perceive what is the mind of the Torah giver. And this is the same way, as we'll find later on, that Moshe had help rightly ruling over the people. They chose their elders, their leaders, their chiefs, and then he picked the ones chosen by the people so that there was unanimous consent of the governed. And he endowed them with the Ruach of our Creator and taught them so that they could help others. And anything that was too hard for them, they were to bring up the chain. That's how government is supposed to function. It's originally how our constitutional government functioned before it was perverted. And in the same way, Kepha was taught the truth and then sent out to set these things up, just like Moshe was given the elders and then they went out to help them. But here we go. This is chapter 22, repetition of instructions. When he had said this, he began to expound to me point by point of those chapters of Torah that seemed to be in question from the beginning of the creation, even to that point of time at which I came to him at Caesarea, telling me that the delay of Shimon had contributed to my learning all things in order. At other times, said he, we will discourse more fully on individual points of which we have now spoken shortly, according as the occasion of our conversation will bring them before us, so that according to my promise, you may gain a full and perfect knowledge of all. Since then, by this delay we have today on our hands, I desire to repeat to you again what has been spoken, that it may be the better recalled to your memory. Then he began in this way to refresh my recollection of what he had said. Do you remember, friend Clement, the account I gave you of the ageless age that knows no end? Then said I, never Kepha will I retain anything if I lose or forget that. Chapter 13, it says, then Kepha, having heard my answer with pleasure, said, I congratulate you because you have answered thus, not because you speak of these things easily, but because you profess that you remember them. For the most sublime truths are best honored by means of silence. Yet for the credit of those things that you remember concerning things not to be spoken, tell me what you retain of those things that we spoke of in the second place, which can easily be spoken out, that perceiving your tenacity of memory, I may the more readily point out to you and freely open the things of which I desire to speak. Then, when I perceived that he rejoiced in the told memory of his hearers, said, not only am I mindful of your definition, but also of that preface that was prefixed to the definition, and of almost all things that you have expounded. I retain the sense complete, though not all the words, because the things that you have spoken have been made, as it were, native to my inner being and inborn. For you have held out a most sweet cup to me in my excessive thirst. And that you may not suppose that I am occupying you with words, being unmindful of things, I will now call to mind the things that were spoken, in which the order of your discussion greatly helps me, for the way in which the things that you said followed by consequence upon one another, and were arranged in a balanced manner, makes them easily easily recalled to memory by the lines of their order. For the order of sayings is useful for remembering them. For when you begin to follow them point by point in succession, when anything is wanting, immediately the sense seeks for it, and when it has found it, retains it, or at all events, if it cannot discover it, there will be no reluctance to ask it of the master, but not to delay in granting you what you demand of me. I will shortly rehearse what you delivered to me concerning the definition of truth. We're continuing now. This is chapter 24, and it's the repetition continued. Clement's now giving his definition of truth. It says, there always was, there is now, and there ever will be, that by which the first will begotten from eternity consists. And a better way of saying that is unbegotten, because our Father's was not created. He's not a begotten being at all. He's the self-existent one who did not come into being, the only true Elohim. But this is just another way of trying to say that, begotten from eternity, right? So it says, there always was, there is now, and there ever will be, that by which the first will begotten from eternity consists. And from the first will proceeds a second will. After these came the world, and from the world came time. From this, the multitude of men, and from the multitude, the election of the beloved, from whose oneness of mind, the peaceful or the shalom-filled Malkuth of Yahuwah is constructed. But the rest which ought to follow these, you promised to tell me at another time. After this, when you had explained about the creation of the world, you intimated or hinted the decree of Yahuwah that he, of his own good pleasure, announced in the presence of all the first messengers or Melachim, and that he ordained as an ageless Torah to all, and how he established two reigns or Malkuthkot, right? Kingdoms, they call it. I mean that of the present time and that of the future, and appointed times to each, and decreed that a yom of judgment should be expected, which he determined, in which a severance is to be made of things and of ruach oath or spirits, so that the immoral indeed will be consigned to ageless fire for their sins. But those who have lived or existed according to the will of Yahuwah the Creator, having received a baraka for their Tob works, effulgent with the brightest light, introduced into an ageless abode and abiding in incorruption, will receive ageless gifts in ineffable barakoth or blessings. Chapter 25. While I was going on thus, Kepha, enraptured with joy and anxious for me, as if I had been his son, lest it befell me that I should fail in recollection of the rest, and be put to shame on account of those who were present, said, it is enough, O Clement, for you have stated these things more clearly than I myself explained them. Then said I, liberal learning has conferred upon me the power of orderly narration, and of stating those things clearly for which there is occasion. And if we use learning in asserting the errors of antiquity, we ruin ourselves by talent and smoothness of speech. But if we apply learning in favor of speech to the assertion of the truth, I think that not a little advantage is thereby gained. Be that as it may, my master Kepha, you can but imagine with what thankfulness I am transported for all the rest of your instruction indeed, but especially for the statement of that doctrine that you gave. There is one Yahuwah, whose work the world is, and who, because he is in all respects righteous, will render to everyone according to his deeds. And after that you added, for the assertion of this dogma, countless thousands of words will be brought forward. But in those to whom is granted knowledge of the true foreteller, all this forest of words is cut down. And on this account, since you have delivered to me a discourse concerning the true foreteller, you have strengthened me with all confidence of your assertions. And then, having perceived that the sum of all obedience and piety consists in this, I immediately replied, you have proceeded most excellently, O Kepha. So in the future expound unhesitatingly, as to one who already knows what are the foundations of belief and piety, the traditions of the true foreteller, who alone, as has been clearly proved, is to be believed. But that exposition that requires assertions and arguments reserved for those unbelievers to whom you have not yet judged it proper to commit the indubitable belief of foretold favor. When I had said this, I added, you promised that you would give at a proper time two things. First, this exposition, at once simple and entirely free from error, and then an exposition of each individual point as it may be evolved in the course of the various questions that will be raised. And after this, you expounded the sequence of things in order from the beginning of the world, even to the present time. And if you please, I can repeat the whole from memory. And then chapter 26, the friendship of Yahuwah house secured. To this Kepha answered, I am exceedingly delighted, O Clement, that I commit my words to so safe a heart. For to be mindful of the things that are spoken is an indication of having in readiness the belief of works. But he from whom the immoral demon steals away the words of deliverance and snatches them away from his memory cannot be delivered, even though he desire it. For he loses the way by which life or existence is reached. So let us rather repeat what has been spoken and confirm it in your heart, that is, in what manner or by whom the world was made, that we may proceed to the friendship of the Creator. But his friendship is secured by living well and by obeying his will, which is the Torah or instruction of all that live. We will therefore unfold these things briefly to you in order that they may be the more surely remembered. All right, and then he's going to get into an account from the creation and then expounding point generation by generation and then summarizing as you go along. He's going to go from the creation to his current times again. And this is a great resource right here for lining up the chronology of the events in history, not finding definite dates, but the order in which things happen that the other books talk about. You can see what generation they happened in, which is pretty interesting. But before we continue, it says, account of the creation. In the beginning, when Yahuwah had made the Shemayim and the earth as one house, the shadow that was cast by the mundane bodies involved in darkness those things that were enclosed in it. And this is an interesting phrase that really stuck out to me, just so you know. But a lot of people hold to the idea that we started creation in darkness and that light was introduced after things were made. But right here goes along with what you can plainly read in the scriptures that are common to us all, where the Father of lights, in whom there is no change nor shadow of turning, dwells in unapproachable light. That's always true. And right here, if you can see that, it's saying the same thing. He dwells in light. When he made the creation, the Shamayim and the earth, the waters, the things that were in it, it's what cast the shadow onto the deep. And then he introduces light into it right here, as you can see. So if you keep that concept in mind, it helps. And it's pretty interesting, but that's not something that a lot of people even know or hold to. So here we go. It says, but when the will of Yahuwah had introduced light, that darkness that had been caused by the shadows of bodies was straightway dispelled. Then at length light is appointed for the Yom, darkness for the night, or Lila. And now the water that was within the world, in the middle space of that first Shamayim and earth, congealed as with frost, and solid as crystal, it distended, and the middle spaces of the Shamayim and earth are separated by a firmament of this sort. And that firmament the Creator called Shamayim, so called by the name of that previously made. And so he divided into two portions that fabric of the universe or creation, although it was but one house. I don't know exactly what word was used right here, but most often when they translate a word to universe, it was originally the word for world, like the whole habitable world in Hebrew. Right. The reason of the division was this, that the upper portion might afford a dwelling place to Melachim or messengers, and the lower to men. After this, the place of the sea and the chaos that had been made received that portion of the water that remained below, by order of the ageless will, and these flowing down to the sunken hollow places, the dry land appeared, and the gatherings of the waters were made seas. And after this, the earth, which had appeared, produced various species of herbs and shrubs. It gave forth fountains also and rivers, not only in the plains, but on the mountains. And so all things were prepared, that men who were to dwell in it might have in their power to use all these things according to their will, that is, either for good, tov, or evil. After this, he adorns that visible sky with stars. And before we go on, I did want to mention, it specifically mentions that the firmament there is made like ice-like crystal. And this awesome crystal-like ice is also mentioned in the book of Ezekiel specifically, and in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I can't remember exactly where it is, but I can find that for you. It talks about the awesome crystal explicitly there. And then I don't know how many of you may be familiar, but there's a YouTube channel called Founded Earth Brothers. It used to be Flat Earth Brothers, but they changed their name. And they have a video, and one of them that they talk about, there was a gentleman who was an Army crew chief for Black Hawks. He maintained the helicopters and took care of them, but he wasn't the pilot. He was interviewed. He was not religious at all, and he was assigned to work in the Antarctic. While he was there, he talked to scientists who were doing experiments with stuff that they called sky ice, which was chunks of the firmament that they would bring back to study. And so it's very interesting, but the awesome cold ice-like crystal that's mentioned here, someone that's alive today has actually experienced. There's scientists there, but this gentleman from the Army, he's actually talking about that, and I'll link that video later. This is after this, he adorns that visible sky with stars. He places in it also the sun and the moon, that the Yom might enjoy the light of the one, the night that of the other, and that at the same time they might be for an indication of things past, present, and future. For they were made for signs of seasons and of Yamim, which although they are seen indeed by all, are comprehended only by the learned and intelligent. Now, if you've been following with the Antichrist or Anti-Mashiach for Dummies videos, you can see how the luminaries are used to point out future events. If you've ever read the books like Witness in the Stars or the Mazzaroth, or any of those that actually go through the meanings of the names of the luminaries and what it actually shows, it talks about events that are from the past, the things that are currently going on, and the future events that are being pointed out as well. So all of that stuff ties together, and it's exactly as it says here. Everyone sees these things, but not everyone comprehends what they mean. Quite often we're deceived into thinking and believing things that just aren't true. So it says, and when after this he had ordered living creatures to be produced from the earth and the waters, he made paradise, or Eden, which also he named the place of delights. But after all these things he made man, on whose account he had prepared all things, whose internal species is older, meaning his inner being, or what is commonly called the soul. In the book of Yobelim, it mentions that it's the inner being of every man, regardless of when he was born in the world, was created on the first Yom, the first day of existence. But it says, whose internal species is older, and for whose sake all things that were made, given up to his service, and assigned to the uses of his habitation. This is chapter 29, the Nephilim, the flood. This is all.
We're not seeing your screen. I apologize.
Oh, thank you for that. Just a moment. It's still loading, so we'll go ahead and pause the recording. All right, we'll try this again. Chapter 29, this is the Nephilim, the flood. All things, therefore, being completed that are in Shamayim and in earth and in the waters, and man's race also having multiplied, in the 8th generation, Zadikim, so this is in the generation of Methuselah, when Hanok was already alive and had his son, because he was the 7th. Methuselah, his death would be the generation where they were doing that. But in the 8th generation, Zadikim, or righteous ones who had lived the life of messengers, being allured by the beauty of women, fell into promiscuous and illicit connections with these, and thenceforth acting in all things without discretion and disorderly, they changed the state of man's affairs and the Elohim prescribed order of existence, so that either by persuasion or force they compelled all men to sin against Yahuwah their creator. In the 9th generation are born the Gibborim, so called from of old, not dragon-footed as the fables of the Greeks relate, but men of immense bodies, whose bones of enormous size are still shown in some places for confirmation. And we think that some of the bones that we see that we can still find are pretty big. But if you look at some of the older articles, some of the writings that they were finding bones of some that were 38 feet tall, like full-size sarcophagus of massively large individuals all over the world, Australia, America. I think they just found one in India not too long ago. So these are still found in some places, but they're not reported on in honesty anymore. The further back you go, especially in the 1800s, they had news reports back all over the place, articles from all over the world about them finding these things. It says, but against these, the righteous providence of Yahuwah brought a flood upon the world, that the earth might be purified from their pollution, and every place might be turned into a sea by the destruction of the immoral. Yet there was then found one righteous man by name Noach, who being delivered in the Tavah or ark with his 3 sons and their wives, became the colonizer of the world after the subsiding of the waters, with those animals and seeds that he had shut up with him. And if you remember, Noach living through this experience, the fact that he was before and after the flood as the patriarch of the people that existed, he was the one that they based their false mighty one, the two-faced mighty one, off of, that they began their years with in the Gregorian calendar. That's where that perversion started. All perversion starts with Satan taking the truth and twisting it, and then going off in that his own direction with those things. That's information that you'll find in Alexander Hislop's 2 Babylons. But chapter 30 says Noach's sons. In the 12th generation, when Yahuwah had Baruch or blessed men, and they had begun to multiply, they received a commandment that they should not taste blood. For on account of this also, the flood had been sent, or the deluge had been sent. In the 13th generation, when the second of Noach's 3 sons had done an injury to his father, speaking of Ham, and had been cursed by him, he brought the condition of slavery upon his posterity. His elder brother meantime obtained the lot of a dwelling place in the middle region of the world, in which is the country of Yahudah. The younger obtained the eastern quarter, which I think it's supposed to be western, and he the western, because Shem, if you remember, has the Middle East. Ham had what we call Africa, and Japheth had what we call Europe, or the isles, the fingers that stick out from the Mediterranean. This is, and he the western. In the 14th generation, one of the cursed progeny first erected an altar to demons for the purpose of magical arts, and offered their bloody sacrifice, or zebachim, sacrifices. In the 15th generation, for the first time, men set up an idol and worshipped it. Until that time, the Hebrew language, which had been given by Yahuwah to men, bore sole sway. Excuse me. And you can see setting up idols, false religion leads to the language being changed. Perverting the truth makes them take it from your mouth. This is a theme that you'll see over and over again in scripture, as well as in history as it relates to his people, because the language does change over time. And every time they've migrated outside of the land and went either east or west, the language changes. And you can see it in a variety of places, but it's always based on the violence we do to the truth and how it reflects in the language that we're speaking. For anyone that's not familiar, there's a mountain of evidence to show that all the Celtic languages, every derivative of it, the Irish, the Welsh, the Gaelic Celtic, if you will, both the one in the mainland Europe and what's still spoken in the Isles today, those were originally Hebrew. Also, all the Germanic languages, including English, was originally Hebrew. And the way that they broke off and migrated determined the way that the language shifted and changed. And these things are not only known, but they're marked, they've been studied. There's a doctrinal dissertation about the similarities between Hebrew and Germanic, which I thought was very enlightening. But once you realize that the people that speak these languages are the literal seed descendants, not the only ones, but a vast majority of them, then the truth in scripture starts to make more sense. And you can see the proof of what I'm saying about the language changing. I'll put the dissertation in the link for the video, so anyone that wants to can look at that as well. It says, in the 16th generation, the sons of men migrated from the east, and coming to the lands that had been assigned to their fathers, each one marked the place of his own allotment by his own name. Madai, Elam, Nimrod, right? Ninus, everyone, Cush, all the people naming their lands after their own names when they were migrating out. Right. Excuse me. It says, in the 17th generation, Nimrod reigned in Babylonia and built a city, and thence migrated to the Persians and taught them to worship fire. We'll get a little more detail about that in the future, but I want you to see Nimrod was born in the 13th generation. Ham was the first to do witchcraft. He set up idols and this false worship. Mitzrayim also got involved with that, and he was killed. And it was the ashes of Mitzrayim that Nimrod brought to Persia to teach them fire worship, which eventually came down as Mithraism, which was adopted by the Romans as Sol Invictus, or what we call Apollyon in the book of Revelation. But he was reigning in Babylon in the 17th generation. That's still 3 generations before Abraham's even born. And they were nowhere in relation to one another, as we'll also see here. All right, we'll do 2 more and then stop for see if there's any questions or anything. This is the world after the flood. This is chapter 31. In the 18th generation, walled cities were built, armies were organized and armed, shephotim, or judges, and laws were sanctioned. Hikalim, or temples were built, and the Sarim, princes of tribes, were adored as mighty ones. In the 19th generation, the descendants of him who had been cursed after the flood, going beyond their proper bounds that they had obtained by lot in the western regions, drove into the eastern lands those who had obtained the middle portion of the world, and pursued them as far as Persia, while themselves violently took possession of the country from which they expelled them. In the 20th generation, a son for the first time died before his father on account of an incestuous crime. 32. In the 21st generation, there was a certain prudent man or wise man. Now, he was born in the 20th, depending on your reckoning. If you look at the book of Yobelim, it does mention there's someone else in the genealogy that was born that's not mentioned in the genealogies in the common scriptures, except for in the book of Luke. And they take that as a fluke sometime. But it's the same thing. If you look, there's 3 sovereigns that were missing from the kings that reigned in the land because they were going to be removed from his book. And so they weren't recorded that way. It could be a typo, or it could be that it was accidentally, or it was intentionally not written. But the father of Kesed was the one that found the writings of the watchers and wrote them down, and then passed it down to his children, who founded Ur of the Kasdim, the city in Babylon from which Abraham came. And they were the ones that passed down the astrology, as we call it today, from the watchers after the flood. And it's one of the pillars of witchcraft. So it was a harsh crime, but Abba willing, we won't be involved in any of that stuff anymore. So I just wanted to clarify that could be why this says 21st generation, but it also tends to mention the generation that the things happen in and not the generation that the person was born of. So getting back on track, it says, in the 21st generation, there was a certain prudent man of the race of those who were expelled, of the family of Noach's eldest son, by name Abraham or Abraham, from whom our Hebrew tribe is derived. When the whole world was again overspread with errors, and when for the hideousness of its crimes destruction was ready for it, this time not by water but fire, and when already the scourge was hanging over the whole earth, beginning with Sodom, this man by reason of his friendship with Yahuwah, who was well pleased with him, obtained from Yahuwah that the whole world should not equally perish. Now, this is talking about when he talked with Yahuwah, when our Mashiach appeared to him, and he saw Yahuwah with two messengers, and he bowed before him, fed them, washed their feet. When that happened, he spoke with our Mashiach, and he was going back and forth with him, and eventually got down to the point where if only 10 righteous were found in a city, he would preserve that city for his sake, or for their sake. And so our Creator, our Mashiach, the Father through him, agreed to that. And that's why the whole world didn't perish through fire. Whether there was 10 righteous in every city that's ever been, I can't speak for certainty. But there is a certainty that a city will not be overthrown with the righteous in it if there's at least 10. He will have them read, or he'll have them leave beforehand. And that's an example you see throughout Scripture. It says, from the first, this same man, being an astronomer, learning astronomy from his ancestors, right, was able from the account and order of the stars to recognize the Creator, while all others were in error, and comprehended that all things are regulated by his providence. Whence also a messenger standing by him in a vision instructed him more fully concerning those things that he was beginning to perceive. He showed him also what belonged to his race and posterity, and promised him that those districts should be restored rather than given to them. Therefore, Abraham, when he was desirous to learn the causes of things, and was intently pondering upon what had been told him, the true foreteller Yahushua appeared to him, who alone knows the hearts and purpose of men, and disclosed to him all things that he desired. He taught him the knowledge of the Almighty, intimated or hinted the origin of the world, and likewise its end, and showed him the immortality of the inner being, what we call the soul, or nephesh in Hebrew, and the manner of life or existence that was pleasing to Yahuwah. Declared also the resurrection of the dead, the future judgment, the reward of the Tob, and the punishment of the evil, all to be regulated by righteous judgment. And having given him all this information plainly and sufficiently, he departed again to the invisible abodes. But while Abraham was still in ignorance, as we have said to you before, he acquired 2 sons, of whom the one was called Ishmael, and the other Eliezer, whom he adopted. And this would have been the one born in his house, his servant that he had adopted. From the one are descended the barbarous tribes, what we call the Arabians, right? From the other, the people of the Persians, some of whom have adopted the manner of living and the institutions of their neighbors, the Brahmins. Others settled in Arabia, of whose posterity some have also spread into Mitzrayim. From them, some of the Indians and the Mitzrayim have learned to be circumcised and to be of purer observance than others, although in process of time, most of them have turned to impiety. That was the proof and sign of purity. And I wasn't familiar with that, but I thought it was interesting to learn that there were other nations that partook of the circumcision as well. Most of them were Hebrews or those that were taught by them, right? All right, so it says Yarushal, the Yishraelim, the Israelites, as they call it in English, in Mitzrayim, or in Egypt. Nevertheless, as he had got these two sons during the time while he still lived in ignorance of things, having received the knowledge of Yahuwah, he asked of the righteous one that he might merit to have offspring by Sarah, who was his lawful wife, though she was barren. She obtained a son whom he named Yitzhak, from whom came Yaakov, and from him the 12 patriarchs, and from these 12, 72. These, when the famine befell, came into Mitzrayim with all their family, and in the course of 400 years, this is ambiguous here, but from the Dead Sea Scrolls, from Josephus, from the writings of Shaul, from the Masoretic text itself, it disproves these things, but it shows that they did not stay in the land of Mitzrayim or Egypt for 400 years, but they were in the land of Mitzrayim and Canaan, being afflicted and mistreated for 430 years total, 215 in each. And there's actually an excellent video made by a gentleman, I think his YouTube channel is Nathan82 or something to that effect, which I'll also link if you are interested in looking at it. He has two videos that I really appreciate. One was how long were the Israeli in Mitzrayim or Egypt, and the other one was when were the pyramids built. Does an excellent job of showing why the chronology is off in the Masoretic text. But to continue here, it says, these, when famine befell, came into Mitzrayim with all their family, and in the course of 400 years, being multiplied by the baraka and promise of Yahuwah, they were afflicted by the Mitzrayim. And when they were afflicted, Yahushua appeared to Moshe and struck the Mitzrayim with 10 plagues. So Kepha directly showing it was our Mashiach who appeared in the burning bush, which is what you can also see alluded to in the common, or in the scriptures that are common to us all. He mentions there that for Moshe to take off the sandals of his feet because where he stands is set apart. And then later in the life of Yahushua, the son of Nun, when he sees the prince of the hosts of Yahuwah's armies, and he bows down and worships him, he's told the same thing. And that is our Mashiach that he was speaking to. But he said, take off your sandals, for where you stand is set apart ground, showing it was the same one speaking to him. But it says, Yahushua appeared to Moshe and struck the Mitzrayim with 10 plagues when they refused to let the Hebrew people depart from them and returned to their native land. And he brought the people of Yahuwah out of Mitzrayim. But those of the Mitzrayim who survived the plagues, being infected with the animosity of their sovereign, pursued after the Hebrews. And when they had overtaken them at the seashore, they thought to destroy and exterminate them all. Excuse me. Moshe, pouring out prayer to Yahuwah, divided the sea into 2 parts, so that the waters were held on the right hand and on the left, as it had been frozen, or as if it had been frozen. and the people of Yahuwah passed over a dry road. But the Mitzrayim who were pursuing them, rashly entering, were drowned. For when the last of the Hebrews came out, the last of the Mitzrayim went down into the sea, and straightway the waters of the sea, which by his command were held, bound as with frost, so just like the firmaments held, were loosed by his command that had bound them, and recovering their natural freedom, inflicted punishment on the immoral tribe. And after this, Moshe, by the command of Yahuwah, whose providence is over all, led out the people of the Hebrews into the wilderness, and leaving the shortest road that leads from Mitzrayim to Yahudah, he led the people through long windings of the wilderness, that by the discipline of 40 years, the novelty of a changed manner of existence might root out the evils that had clung to them by a long continued familiarity with the customs of the Mitzrayim. Now, I would like to point out, it was the people of the Hebrews that had mixed with the Mitzrayim only that continued to stay there. The ones that had not mixed, when they were about to kill the firstborn, when they were enslaving them and were about to kill them, they got together and they left and they were protected. And their history is known as the ancient history of Caledonia. It's freely available online, but you can track them from about 1500 BC to 1290 AD. And they spread out to Greece. They went to Europe. They went eventually to what we call Scotland. And it was a remnant each time, protected and kept safe, while paganized Hebrews were being left everywhere. And that's where they were spreading out to begin with, where they have these Celtic peoples back in antiquity that had the same worship as those in the land of Canaan, because they adopted it and were carrying it around. But I just wanted to point out, it was only the ones that were being corrected, and he was rooting out the evils of the mixture that they had, that were actually partaking of that and were given the covenant with him out at the foot of the mountain. There were Hebrews alive at the time that were not suffering, that were not delivered in the same miraculous manner, but they were later preached to, and the whole world, just like they were lost at the time, as a foreshadow of the later dispersion and then ultimate regathering. It's the same thing, but the repeated echoes in history of these things that you see coming out of the adulterated worship, coming out of the persecution, or what you say the forerunner for Babylon right here, and then given deliverance. It's this theme over and over again also. This is meantime, they came to Mount Sinai, and from there Torah was given to them with voices and sights from Shemayim, written in 10 precepts, of which the first and greatest was that they should worship Yahuwah himself alone, and not make to themselves any appearance or form to worship. But when Moshe had gone up to the mount and was staying there 40 yamim, or days, the people, although they had seen Mitzrayim struck with the 10 plagues, and the sea parted and passed over by them on foot, manna also given to them from the Shemayim for bread, and drink supplied to them out of the rock that followed them, which kind of food was turned into whatever taste anyone desired. And although being placed under a torrid region of the Shemayim, they were shaded by a cloud in the Yom, or daytime, that they might not be scorched by the heat, and by night were enlightened by a pillar of fire, lest the horror of darkness should be added to the vastness of the wilderness. Those very people, I say, when Moshe stayed in the mount, made and worshipped the golden calf's head after the fashion of Apis, which is derived from the meaning of a word, the hidden one, having also related to do with the hidden one, or what is wrongly named by the seventh day of the week, commonly for their false mighty one, Saturn. And it also has to do with the false mystery religion stuff that was brought in by Nimrod that you can find in Alexander Hislop's Two Babylons. So this errant stuff that was brought in that we just read about, you can see witness to in language and in antiquity with the information that he shares in his book. But it says, after the fashion of Apis, whom they had seen worshipped in Mitzrayim, and after so many and so great marvels that they had seen, were unable to cleanse and wash out from themselves the defilements of old habit. On this account, leaving the short road that leads from Mitzrayim to Yahuda, Moshe conducted them by an immense circuit of the desert, so that if he might be able, as we mentioned before, to shake off the evils of old habit by the change of a new education. And it's something that the enemies of the truth have learned quite a while ago, but you raise up the children. You train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's older, he turns not from it. That entire generation that was numbered, the men of battle died, but their children were instructed in a new education, and they're the ones that were brought into the land. So I think that's a good spot for us to stop at this time. And then, Abba willing, you all have a wonderful Shabbat, and we will continue with their recounting of history up to their current times next week. Thank you all, and you have a wonderful Yom and Shavua Tov, wonderful week.